What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you our final part in our Story of Pathfinder Kingmaker series. In our last episode, we successfully defended our kingdom from invasions of sorts from Irovedi, the king of Pitax. So after that concludes, we need to wait for whatever's left of the Ancient Curse Part 6 to carry through, and then we get a bit of a freebie part of the Ancient Curse timer that is Part 7. Now, at the end of Part 7, during which you will have been able to basically just freely explore the map and focus on your kingdom management, but at the end of Part 7, you will be directed to head to a spot on the map called Thousand Voices, specifically an area called the Castle of Knives. Now, this is where your kingdom will start to crumble pretty quickly. So, up to this point, the Ancient Curse has been establishing portals at the Bald Hilltop. And as this curse has progressed, that portal has become more stable. And now, it's finally stable enough for you to travel to the First World to confront Nyrissa. Now, in your capital, you will wind up having a small council with all of your companions where you guys basically say, okay, now we need to go confront Nyrissa and wrap this up and put a bow on it. From here, the rest of the game is more of a narrative experience as well as combat. The kingdom management stuff falls off. The timers are still kind of there here and there. However, most of the other stuff kind of falls away. Now, I do want to mention that if you are thinking, well, I'll just take my time and continue on until, I'm ready to go, I wouldn't recommend it, because if you are playing with kingdom management on, you're going to be given 3 problem events a day until eventually you're not going to have advisors to deal with them. And then they will continue because most problem events take at least 7 days to complete. So essentially, you're going to be overwhelmed with kingdom events until your kingdom falls. Or alternatively, on auto, you'll just hit a timer that ends your game. You need to head to the Castle of Knives in Thousand Voices. Now, upon arriving at the Castle of Knives, you're going to run into the Nerly Witch as well as the Wriggling Man, and they'll be arguing over something, and they start fighting. Shortly after this, an entity called Shika the Mini will appear to you. Shika is actually one of the eldest of the First World herself, or his self, or itself. So Shika the Mini is more than just a title for this person. Shika is actually an arcanomancer, so to speak, that is to say a master of time. Now, as the title might imply, Shika takes on many forms. They all speak with the same voice, and they all have the same powers. It can be a man, a woman, different races, all sorts of stuff, hence the name Shika the Mini. But Shika will explain to us that the Nerly Witch and the Wriggling Man are Nyrissa's lieutenants and chief advisors, and they are fighting over something called the First Crown that has been lost. The First Crown was the crown of the king from the very first kingdom that Nyrissa destroyed to fill her apology cup. So the outside portion of the Castle of Knives, you will be able to track down the 3 pieces of the broken First Crown that you can then assemble and take back to Shika here, where you can make a decision. You can give it to an Inquisitor you will have met while doing this quest. That's kind of the neutral option. It gives the cursed king in the crown rest. Or you can keep the crown for yourself, you can give it to Shika, or you can potentially free the spirit of the king that is trapped in this crown. Now, like I mentioned, giving it to the Inquisitor is kind of the real option without too much of a hassle. If you give it to Shika, that has big implications. Keeping it for yourself has a few things here and there, but isn't that big of a deal. And then freeing the ghost has some ramifications as well. So freeing him will actually call for his help in a later battle, whereas giving it to Shika has a much bigger consequence that I will discuss at the right time. But suffice to say, it's a pretty important quest. Now, once you get this done, you can head farther up into the Castle of Knives, where eventually you will find a portal. And out will walk a guy called the Horned Hunter, who says that he helps guard the portal and that he works for Nyrissa. At which point he will summon a couple of Jabberwocks to fight you, and once they're dead, you'll be free to enter the portal to the First World. Now, when you enter, you're going to wake up alone, but you'll see a vision of Nyrissa guiding Lindsay into this house. Now, once you wake up properly and come to your, senses where you can move around, you will meet Evindra. Evindra being a character, of course, that we met in Chapter 6, and is Nyrissa's Nereid cousin. Evindra will explain that Nyrissa has taken your companions and scattered them around through her house at the end of time, which is kind of like her seat of power in the First World. Evindra will also explain that if you haven't found the Briar, that is to say that you didn't get the actual Briar from Iroveti that the briar is in the house somewhere. Evindra will actually just offer up this information for you. And because she offers it up, I'm going to explain real fast. If you don't have the briar up to this point, it's still possible to get it. It's just very difficult because you have to pass a very high perception check on the second floor, I believe it is. And then even if you pass that perception check, you then have to pass the very high lock-picking skill check next to then get the briar. So it's very easy to miss, even now that we know where it is again, because you have to pass 2 very high checks to find it and then actually be able to get it. So ideally, it is actually easier to get it from Iroveti if possible. Now, like I mentioned, we came to all by ourselves and that our companions are scattered around the house. So once we enter the house, we need to start picking up our companions. Now, this is also a very important part of the story because, as I mentioned in a previous episode, I believe, doing your side quests for your companions is important. And this moment is why. If your companion's side quest was not successfully completed, they will die here. Basically, if any of the side quests failed for any reason, they will die or leave. In the case of Amiri, they leave, because Amiri is like an iconic character for Pathfinder, so they didn't want to like actually kill her off. So she will leave, but everyone else pretty well just dies. When it comes to the side quests, you don't necessarily have to resolve them any particular way. There are multiple ways for each of those side quests to resolve themselves, thus affecting the end slide that you'll see for that companion at the end of the game. However, all you have to do to keep them alive here is successfully complete the quest in some way. So once we gather up all of our companions, which involves fighting a couple people, specifically the Horned Hunter again as we pick up Lindsay. Also, if Lindsay dies, her consciousness gets transferred into the book she's writing so she can continue writing it because she is, of course, our narrator, as well as the person in charge of writing the journal entries for all of our quests. And also, it's important that you fought Horned Hunter right here. Now, while we're picking up Lindsay, she will explain that there are keys that lead to the shrine where the apology is kept, because that's what we're trying to get to. Because if we can get to the apology, we can force Nyrissa to appear and confront us. Because until then, she's not the type to confront people herself, as you might have guessed from her backhanded tactics up to this point in the game. So finding the keys to get into the shrine involves exploring the sanctum a little bit here. So the Nurly Witch and the Wriggling Man that we met earlier will both have one of the keys. The Nurly Witch is in the basement, the Wriggling Man is up on the second floor. Ironically enough, they hate each other and will both task you with trying to find the other one, or, killing the other one for them. And then the third key is actually hidden in a mist puzzle in the basement as well, which is a bit of a pain, but as long as you're exploring, you'll eventually find it. And all you have to do is solve that puzzle, kill an enemy, and grab the key from them. Now, when it comes to the Nurly Witch, it is possible, if you have the evil alignment, to convince her to just not fight you at all and just give you the key, which is pretty nice, actually. Now, if you choose to fight her, and you set the king from the first crown free from the crown, he will actually assist you in that fight with the Nurly Witch. Now, as for the Wriggling Man, he has some stuff going on, but, you can also just kill him for the key. He's involved with, like, a side quest and some mirrors and stuff. So, again, it's a thing you can do, but honestly, you just need the key from him. Now, once you have all 3 of these keys, you can enter the shrine where the apology cup is being kept, and thus Nyrissa will finally confront you. Now, this is a very important scene. It's potentially the end of the game, even. When Nyrissa pops up to confront us, we will actually see the Horned Hunter chained to a tree where he was punished for failing Nyrissa by not being able to kill you. But as we're talking to Nyrissa, a few things come up here. 1, if you have the briar, you can attempt to return it to her, which opens up the option to not have to fight her. But while it is part of the secret ending, it's not the whole thing. In order to unlock the secret ending, which kind of begins to see its fruition right here, you have to have been trying to romance Nyrissa the entire time, which of course involves not completing a romance with any other characters, as well as researching 13 of the 16 available curses through kingdom management, so you can have an understanding of curses, as well as getting some specific dialogue options from Tartuk, as well as Vortikai. It involves, of course, finding the briar and giving it to her. So basically what needs to happen is when you give the briar to her, she has to want to accept it, which requires her to be in love with you, right? So if she doesn't want to accept the briar, then the fight just happens like normal. But if you've romanced her enough through conversation options with her up to this point, she can accept the briar from you, which is great. You get to skip the fight. However, you might not know how to then free her from her curse from the Lantern King, which is where all the research on the curses comes in. And then, even then, with all that research, you still have to have the conversation options from the two individuals I mentioned earlier to actually then trigger the final parts. So again, there's a lot going on, but that is what involves the secret ending. It kind of sees its comeuppance right here. We will finish that once we get to the appropriate part. Now, once we fight Nyrissa, if that's what happened, or, we skipped that fight, the Horned Hunter will reveal himself as none other than the Lantern King himself. As he easily shakes off Nyrissa's spells, holding him to the tree as punishment, he then transforms into Remus, the guy we've met when we first left Oleg's trading post, as well as again through a couple quests throughout the game that I had called attention to. He also reveals himself to be the gnome that we met in the Bloom in Chapter 3, and then he explains, if you chose to spare Nyrissa's life here, that he doesn't appreciate his toy being taken away from him, because you and Nyrissa will have teamed up to form an alliance after she was defeated, because her kingdom falling with her defeat will have been the 1,000th grain in the Apology Cup. But again, you'll be able to form an alliance or spare her life just in general. And the Lantern King won't like that, basically. And he will then depart to go attack your kingdom as a bit of a revenge type thing for sparing Nyrissa's life. Now, if Nyrissa dies right here, that's it. Game over. That's just the end of the game. It's not necessarily a bad ending, but it's not the actual ending. And because, ironically enough, people don't like Nyrissa, despite her supposed to being like a tortured villain type thing, this is also kind of an acceptable ending to the game. But there is potentially one more chapter, which we're about to get into. But before we do that, one last thing. If we gave the first crown to Shaika the Mini, and we either did not give Nyrissa the briar or she did not accept it, then what Shaika will do is use the first crown and her powers over time to essentially take a grain of dust from the Apology Cup, thus resulting in Nyrissa's death without you actually having to fight her. Again, giving you the ending of the game right here. Let's assume you either went with the secret ending that required you to not fight Nyrissa, or you fought her and then chose to spare her life and made an alliance, and now the Lantern King has departed in anger, trying to destroy your kingdom. You will have to follow him through a portal when you are ready and you've explored all of the stuff in the house that you wanted to explore and you're ready to move on. When you go through that portal, you will find yourself in your capital again. You will meet with the Lantern King, where he will explain that the very first time he met you outside of Oleg Trading Post, he said some very specific things to you about he who inherits the stolen lands inherits its pain and its death. Turns out that was actually a curse, and the Lantern King formally curses you right here. You will have to escape this little area of the map, which involves just fighting through some weaker monsters, and you'll probably quickly notice that this curse is debilitating. It is a status effect that gives you minus 60% damage, like a 30 or 40% chance to re-roll your crit rolls. It's a pretty brutal curse. But you'll have to escape and you'll meet the storyteller just towards the entrance. The storyteller will then kind of lead you to a bit of a clearing where you can gather your forces, and he'll explain that, you're cursed. And basically what you need to do is go around your kingdom, gather up your allies and things, and through gathering them, that should weaken the Lantern King's curse on you. Now, lucky for us, the traveling is instant. It's not like the world map we were using earlier. It's just a text event where you click where you want to go, and you're there. Now, you can't rest here outside of talking to the storyteller, who will then help you rest, which is important because that passes time. You have about 20 days or so to wrap all of this up, or the game ends and you fail. Now, as I mentioned, in order to clear this curse from us, which will then carry the story forward, we need to deal with all of the problems the Lantern King is causing around our kingdom. And what he's doing is he's summoning shadows of your past enemies as he drags your kingdom into the first world. So what we need to do is use this portal to travel to the various spots of importance through the map that the storyteller will have told us about and resolve the situation there, which usually involves fighting a shadow of an enemy we've already fought. For instance, we need to go to Oleg's trading post to help our city guard out, and it turns out the Stag Lord, or at least the shadow of the Stag Lord, is attacking Oleg's post again. You can kill him, thus helping Oleg's post as well as freeing up your city guard, which then removes a portion of the curse. So you need to do that, until the curse is gone. Now, also a couple of other things about this particular part of the game. If you are working on the secret ending, there will also be a little extra with Nyrissa where she needs to gather the approval, so to speak, of the other eldest. So there will be a little extra bit with that I wanted to mention, as well as you seeing the culmination of some of your choices here and there. For instance, if you chose to let Tartuk go in Chapter 2, Troll Trouble, this is where you can meet him when you go to Trobold. He can potentially even join your party as a sorcerer. So just stuff like that, you'll start to see the culmination. Now eventually, once this curse is broken, you can then tell the storyteller that you're ready to finally march on the capital with your acquired forces. Now again, what that actually looks like is going to be very different depending on your choices throughout the game. You know, you could have Jamandi on your side. You could maybe not be on your side if you didn't side with her. Maybe Armag's there helping you out. Maybe it's another leader that you put in charge of the Tiger Lords. Kind of just a lot of variations there. Basically, who's your ally and who's not. This can play out a lot of different ways. Now, once we tell the storyteller we're ready to go, if Khalik and Kanara, the DLC companion, are still alive, you'll get a short scene with the Forefather where he finally, takes his plan into motion. The Forefather is, of course, Khalik and Kanara's dad, actually. At which point you'll be given the opportunity to go finish their companion quest. Well, the rest of their companion quest, I should say. Which is the only one that actually plays out after the House of the End of Time. Barring that, you can then travel to confront the Lantern King, which involves you traveling around the fantastical ruins of your capital city as they kind of transcended into the First World. This is where you'll start seeing all of the assembled forces you just gathered, helping you fight through the city. You'll eventually find a piece of the Apology Cup that was destroyed. The storyteller tells you that you need to find all of the fragments of the Apology Cup, bring them to him, so he can destroy them, which will then destroy the barrier to your throne room, which is where the Lantern King is actually waiting for you. So once you do exactly that, gather up all of the fragments of the broken Apology Cup, which is broken because you spared Nyrissa's life, you'll then be able to have the storyteller destroy them and move on to the final confrontation with the Lantern King. So this is a pretty interesting fight. I like that it tells you about the forms of the Lantern King, by the way. So Remus is like the curses and prophecies part of the Lantern King. The gnome is like the jokes and laughter part of the Lantern King. And then the Horned Hunter is like the chaos and craziness of the Lantern King. Because the Lantern King is like the embodiment of like laughter, deceit, and chaos. So I just thought it was cool that they gave like a purpose to each of the forms that they gave him throughout the game. But regardless, you'll have to fight each of those forms. And then after that, the Lantern King will show his true form, which is of course the giant globe of fire we'll have seen up to this point. He will try to properly activate the curse that he laid on you. This is done through like a text event. I've personally never failed this, so I don't know that it is actually possible to do so. But what does happen is that it can affect the companions that are then helping you with the final part of this fight. So for each like successful speech option you pass, kind of countering his curse, some of your companions will like either die or be taken back. But then there's an alignment choice at the end of it in which it kind of seems like you can just forcefully take all of them with you. So I'm not entirely sure that this conversation has any ramifications because I haven't actually seen any, but it seems to imply that like maybe you'd lose some of your companions for the final part of the fight. But again, I haven't actually seen all that. But because the alignment choice, you can only, have like potentially 2 alignments to choose from, and I haven't used every single one of them in this particular conversation. I don't believe there is any particular consequence to this conversation. At least it doesn't, in my experience, seem to have been any. And I've beaten this guy like 4, 5, 6 times now. After this text event in which, you use your words and things to properly counter his curse, you then fight the Lantern King's final form, which will then kill him properly. At which point, he's almost immediately reborn because Fae in the First World are immortal, which is a thing. But he'll have lost a bunch of power because he died. All of his followers are dead, and he doesn't like to die because he mentions, if you haven't done the secret ending, the other eldest can use that opportunity of him dying to play very intricate pranks, which is an allusion to the secret ending if you haven't gotten it. This is potentially also where the secret ending plays out, which is the only way to actually kill the Lantern King. So if you've successfully romanced Nyrissa, freed her of her curse, got the support of the eldest and everything like I mentioned earlier in this video, you will then have an extra conversation option right here where you will actually potentially be able to actually kill the Lantern King, like completely. If you just got here and don't have the true secret ending going on, once you get to this point, you'll have a few different options. Because the Lantern King will offer you immortality and power, and you guys just call it a day. Nyrissa will offer you the same thing, basically, because she's capable of doing that. They're both essentially going to connect you to the first world, thus granting you the immortality that they have, and then they'll kind of become an intricate part of your kingdom. So if you side with the Lantern King in that way, he's literally called the Laughing Lie. His whole thing is like jokes and deceit. So as you might imagine, that ending is not great for your kingdom, but you can choose it because it's the end of the game, so whatever. Nyrissa is kind of the same thing, but if you choose this, you both remain cursed, but it's like the curse has lost all of its power in a way because the Lantern King was defeated, but you are both still cursed, which in my opinion is kind of the neutral option if you want it. Or the other option where you basically tell the Lantern King to remove the curse completely, and all of you just go your separate ways, and they give you your kingdom, which, in my opinion, is the best option outside of the secret ending. And then after that happens, you will be greeted with all the lovely ending slides of all your choices throughout the game. Now, regardless of how things went for you, I find the ending slides to be very satisfying. It's definitely like a payoff of all of the choices you've made in this very long and very extensive RPG. So, there you go, guys. There is the story of Pathfinder Kingmaker. I tried to pack all of the endings and everything in there. Obviously, the ending slides have so much variation, it would take me absolutely forever to go over every possible option. But I will kind of have the end slides up, and you'll kind of see kind of what it goes over, and then there's a lot of variation for each of those. I certainly hope you guys enjoyed the story series here and the plot of Pathfinder Kingmaker. I really enjoyed the game. The story was really cool, even if the game itself had its flaws, which you can check out my review after 100% if you are so interested in hearing my thoughts on those. But regardless, thank you guys so much for watching. I certainly hope you guys like, comment, subscribe, stick around, see what the channel's doing in the future. But again, thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.
Moved its troops to the southern border of the kingdom. Their attack was rebuffed. The enemy state's infantry retreated when the army's wizards brought down rains of fire and magical arrows on the heads of the flabbergasted enemy soldiers. Since then, Galt hasn't risked crossing any borders again, fearing cruel retaliation for further insolence. The feud between Brevois North and South, which had been smoldering for ages, finally sparked the fires of civil war. We didn't interfere, watching as the forces of House Sertova and the Sword Lords slaughtered each other. Alternating between brief truces and fresh fights, Brevois was flooded with blood and grew weak. Its leaders could only watch helplessly as their border territories were slowly annexed by neighbors, until they fell to squabbling among themselves. The butchery in Brevois jeopardized the peace of the entire region. The Tiger Lords found it difficult to recuperate after what Armagh did to them. The barbarians remaining in Numeria weren't very happy that we sheltered the deposed chief and his supporters, but they were too afraid of him to attack us over it. That bomb has a long fuse, but it's definitely burning. I'm afraid that a few generations down the road, the grandchildren of the current Tiger Lords may want to retaliate against us for their grandfathers. Pitax almost returned to its former state, a joyful city filled with beers of dubious quality and deals of questionable legality. The old trade houses lost the crown, but they retrieved the property Iravetti had taken from them. Soon, Pitax became almost like a second capital in the kingdom, a thriving city through which rivers of money from across the region ran. Unfortunately, we get much less of this money than we would like. Governor Liachenza turned out to be helpless against widespread embezzlement. Maestro Bellavara gave the Academy of the Arts a second wind, throwing out mediocre students and sycophants. She gathered within its walls talented visionaries, rebels, and freethinkers, those whose gifts felt cramped within the walls of more respectable institutions. She managed to do what Iravetti never could, namely, make the Academy truly famous, albeit scandalously so. Trolls and kobolds, two of the most savage native peoples living in the Gnarl Marches, were completely exterminated. After enduring so many storms and troubles, Varnhold eventually turned into a real city. Daring settlers decided to conquer the vast, wild expanses of Dunsword, and despite all odds, they succeeded. The modest Magar Varn didn't stay at the court for long. Having saved some seed money, he left service and organized a new Varnling host. The Sootscale kobolds think themselves the masters of the area around the Old Sycamore, and they aren't very friendly toward travelers. It hasn't come to bloodshed yet, but many careless travelers have broken an arm or a leg in the kobolds' traps. Due to tumult on both sides of the border, Oleg's trading post gradually fell into desolation, regretfully leaving its walls, for which so much blood had been shed. Oleg and Svetlana left the backcountry that was so dear to their hearts and returned to the noise of the big city. Jod and Keston, after surviving the bloom, remained loyal to the king they followed through thick and thin, and they continue to serve as court advisors to this day. The austere priest and the gloomy warrior regularly argue over the proper way to govern the state, as well as which of the two rulers. Keston Garas took a post as chief of the kingdom's guard. The former heir to a noble family never returned to Brevoy, severing all ties to his kin. However, Jod remained loyal to the king to the end of his days, healing the sick and generously sharing his austere wisdom with anyone who wished to. Having participated in Lamashtu's ritual, Olika gave birth to a strong and healthy baby. Sadly, the child grew into an unruly and violent adolescent. Having maimed a peer at just 10 years of age, the boy escaped to the Gnarl Marches, fleeing the rage of a mob that tore his mother. The lizard folk of the Longtail tribe returned to live on the shores of Candlemere, but they couldn't return to their ancient way of life. Living alongside people, the lizard folk adopted their behaviors, habits, and even religion. Evindra was glad to see the Lantern King's plans turn to dust. She spent some time helping restore the kingdom after the calamity, then returned home to the First World. They say the rebellious spirit of her cousin. After the victory, the storyteller abandoned his affairs and began spending a lot of time alone in contemplation. We never saw Amiri again. Perhaps she got lost somewhere in the First World. Or maybe she found some other way back. Who knows? Valerie stayed to serve the king, and to this day she continues to be a muse to many people. Not just bards and admirers, but to warriors as well. Harren became famous, respected by dwarves throughout our kingdom as well as our neighbors, even as far as the Five Kings Mountains. He's often been asked to help out or teach others, and he's never denied anyone this. Jaethal spent some time at the king's court, but it became progressively harder for her to hide her true nature from the omnipresent servants of Pharasma. Realizing the risk, she reluctantly left the kingdom, and she soon sent a message from Geb, in a country populated Octavia didn't stay still for very long. Soon, she and Reg went to Numeria and started a huge slave rebellion there. They didn't manage to destroy the Technic League, but to this day, slaves speak their names with admiration, and slavers with Rigangar left for Numeria with Octavia to start a slave rebellion. Over the journey, he really matured. Ekin spent a few years in the Stolen Lands, and in that time won glory as the most rugged monster hunter in all the River Kingdoms. The Ranger exterminated even the most harmless of the monsters around the capital, then moved on to other lands and new victories. They say the ruthless avenger and slayer of wild monsters made it as far. Jubilost returned to the life of a traveling explorer, frequently visiting his favorite kingdom. He said so himself. His famous work studying the First World all opened with a dedication to his longtime companion, the King. Another name was also. As for Knock Knock, apologies, I mean Jester Knock Knock, He continued to be a great source of entertainment for the kingdom, both in and out of the throne room, sometimes even on purpose. His antics in the kingdom had an additional effect. Aside from bringing joy and amusement to the citizens, it also softened the common view of goblins. They even became welcome in the streets of the city, for a time. While he may not have become the hero he envisioned, Knock Knock did find himself and his inner strengths thanks to the king. If you should ever find yourself in the kingdom, be sure to seek him out. Despite all the woes that befell the country, our king remains a strong leader. Many noble houses from neighboring lands wouldn't hesitate. As for myself, the author of this book, Lindsay, who never chose a pretty nickname, I stayed here, within my own book, to watch what happens in the kingdom, and one day